everybody. Thanks for tuning in for another Cruise with Smooth. Before I get started, don't forget to like, share, comment, subscribe. Hit the notification bell. If there's anything that you want to know my opinion on, feel free to leave a comment. So, the last video that I did yesterday, I had made mention about some things I'd heard about Brianna Taylor that I couldn't confirm, but I wanted to kind of try to confirm some of these essentially rumors that I'd heard. And I didn't want to get into it until I could. Now, I'm going to start out by saying that I couldn't get an out-and-out confirmation of this. I got what I would call a 50% confirmation on one of the things I heard. The other one, I can't confirm yet. I'm sure the truth will eventually come out. But I got what I would call a 50% confirmation. So here, and I also want to say that if information comes out concrete, 100% that I'm wrong, I'm not, this is not a hill I'm going to die on. There's another reason, there's two reasons that I believe this. The halfway confirmation that I got, knowing things in the medical field that I know, as far as the pathway a lot of people seem to want to take if they're trying to move up in the medical community. I know people that are scattered throughout the medical community, doctor's office, hospitals, EMS, you name it. And just broadly speaking, there have been a ton of things in the news when it comes to goings on where a thing will happen, there is an established narrative that locks in place around it, and then information that contradicts the narrative comes out, and people are stuck looking stupid because they bought into all this and went and looted and rioted and everything else. So, again, I'll be more than happy to, I am not 100% certain on whether or not I believe this. There's reasons why I believe this, but I'm not 100% certain on it. I'm not trying to diminish the fact that Brianna Taylor died. She did. I'm not trying to justify any actions that were taken by the police that might have been inappropriate or something they weren't trained to do. I'm not trying to instigate more problems. Okay? I just want to speak some things that I heard that I can't confirm. The first thing, a buddy of mine called, trust this guy, known him for years, one of like a handful of people that I would hand the keys to everything I own, give him my bank account numbers and everything else, and I wouldn't worry about it. One of a handful of people outside my family. And then a mutual friend of ours works in the medical community in Louisville where Brianna Taylor worked and was unfortunately killed. So, 100% this guy, this mutual friend of ours, works at a hospital. They keep in touch I keep in touch with this buddy of mine more than I keep in touch with this mutual friend. But we still know each other. Well, anyway, he has been working at the same hospital in Louisville for a number of years. Told my buddy that Brianna Taylor got caught 3 or 4 years ago stealing narcotics at the hospital. I don't know exactly what position she was in at the hospital. I don't know what happened, but she was given the choice to either leave quietly or they would get the police involved. And she left. Now, I can confirm that she not only worked as a paramedic, but she had previously worked at 2 hospitals. I don't know which ones. I imagine a lot of that is going to be employment record, calling up to find out if she did work there. I am putting in 60, 70 hours this week. That's a thing that's not going to happen. But I did find out it was through one of the local papers, I believe the Courier Journal or the WDRB news station. They actually had that in their online articles that she had worked at 2 hospitals prior. The thing about that strikes me as odd is then she went to work as a paramedic. Typically, working as a paramedic, that's kind of it takes a different kind of person to do that as far as your motivations, the things that you enjoy. My sister-in-law's a paramedic. She loves it. And I couldn't stand that job. I couldn't do it. But she, just some of the stories that she talks about, not my thing. But working in an ER or hospital in general, it's different. It's a little slower pace typically, unless you're in the ER on a Friday or Saturday night. But it's not as it doesn't get as dangerous as working as an EMT. But typically people start out at the bottom and then kind of work their way up into the hospitals. Well, and I'm not saying this proves anything. This is just one of those things that makes me So Brianna Taylor started out in hospitals and then went to work in an ambulance. Not saying that proves anything. She may not have done that. But there's news out there that the warrants were wrong, which they weren't. They had her name and her actual address. So there's definitely a narrative that was, well, the police screwed up. She's a paramedic. Why would they come after one of their own? Let's knock out all the windows downtown and flip over an ambulance. They did. So I don't really think that there was a lot of honesty about what really happened. The other thing I heard, and I couldn't find everything out about this, I really couldn't. It involved the medical examiner's report. The only thing that I could find is that the medical examiner's report was released to the Taylor family lawyers as well as to the defense for the police officers involved in the shooting and death of Brianna Taylor. Now I say that because the facts have been so muddled, I'm not going to call it murder. And here's why. If someone breaks into my house with a gun and I kill them dead, that's not murder. That's the shooting death of an armed robber. I'm not saying that's what happened to Brianna Taylor, that, the police actions were justified. I'm just saying that there is a difference between murder and defense, or murder and takedown of a suspect who's resisting arrest, things like that. So, the thing that I heard was in the medical examiner's report. When you die and there's not a reason for you to have died, like old age, cancer, things like that, a lot of times there's a medical examiner's report done, and that determines things such as, were you under the influence of drugs at the time? Did you have a history of drug use? Did you have any underlying health problems at the time that could have contributed to the actions that you took? Things like that. There's a ton of things that they can discover when they take the body apart and look for clues. Now, I cannot prove this. All I know is that the medical examiner's report was released to the lawyer. It has not been released to the public as of right now. I would love to get my hands on it. Allegedly, the medical examiner's report concludes that there is gunshot residue on the hands of Brianna Taylor. Now, to get gunshot residue on your hands, you're typically holding a weapon, more often than not a handgun, when it is fired. Anyone that spent any time around guns will know that when you shoot guns for an extended period of time, more than just one or two magazines, you spend a range day or an intense hour pumping some rounds through a weapon, that you get a little nasty. And I can speak doubly to this. Last year, one time I took my uncle to an indoor range. Not my thing. Only thing I enjoyed about it was being able to put the target at a given distance and not having to walk it and measure it out. You just punch a button and there you go. When you shoot a gun indoors, you get nasty, because the ventilation there's not as much room for the excess powder to go. There's not as much room for the residue to go, and so you just get a little nastier shooting indoors compared to outside. I got gun GSR on my face from this stuff, and I got home and I wiped my face off, and you could tell I got some off me. Well, I said all that to say this: I don't know for sure if that happened. If I find out she didn't, that's fine. She didn't. If I find out for sure that, the cops 100% guaranteed security camera footage shows that they acted improperly, they acted improperly. Okay? And I got no problem standing behind the family of a victim where the cop 100% acts improperly. See what I've said on George Floyd and Derek Chauvin. Derek Chauvin deserves what he's got coming to him. I think the prosecuting attorney is actually mishandling the case, and Officer Derek Chauvin is likely going to get a mistrial or not guilty due to the charges that have been leveled. But I think Officer Derek Chauvin should be punished. My opinion. I think the other officer should be punished for letting it happen. So, but I also know that there was a ton of stories and analysis and opinions and misinformation and narratives that got out way prior to the police release missing information to a lot of things that we know now. So I'll tell you what, I'll say this. I'm not taking sides on whether or not the police and Brianna Taylor, who was right or wrong, because there's evidence to support that she had been involved in illegal drugs, prescription narcotics for a long time. There's evidence to suggest that the police didn't make the mistakes that were alleged when all the rioting started around the time of George Floyd. There's evidence to suggest the police did make the mistakes, that they did make some of the mistakes that were alleged and some that weren't. Okay? So I'm not pretending to know everything. I'm not pretending to pronounce who's right or wrong. But there was definitely a narrative and a story that got pushed rapidly where a lot of the blame laid at the feet of the cops. And if it does, that's fine. The cops should get punished if they were in the wrong. Especially if they were as in the wrong as a lot of the early stories suggested. Now, on the flip side, if everything that I said ends up being the case just now, I think it bears further scrutiny to look at this. And here's my thing, okay, we elect representation in our states and to our government and in our counties to enact laws and ordinances. Now, if someone, and here's the understanding behind it, if you refuse to cooperate with the laws, and I don't care what the law is, okay, if you get a 10 over speeding ticket, that is enforced by guys with guns. Now, you can you chose not to comply with the law, so you can choose not to comply with the fine. If you don't comply with the fine, you'll end up at court. If you don't go to your court date, then someone shows up with a warrant for your arrest because you have broken the law speeding, failure to pay a fine, failure to appear at court. Okay? Then, if you refuse to comply with that officer, there's, depending on the level of not complying with that officer, you might get shot. Just facts. And the thing is, the vast majority of people have no issues complying with that. I've gotten tickets. I've had to appear in court. I've had to pay my tickets. I've had to show up at court for jury duty, and guess what? You fail to appear for that, and you go to jail. Now, I'm not saying it's right or it's wrong, but the people that we have all elected have set it up this way. If we decide that we want to change that, where, okay, say a failure to appear to court doesn't end up in a bench warrant, but it ends up in a cop going up to you, detaining you, and doing an emergency appointment somewhere. I don't know. I'm pulling stuff out of my butt here. But if you decide you want to change the law, if you decide you want that interaction to happen differently, change the law. Don't fight the cop. Rashard Brooks, Atlanta, Georgia. Might have been Marietta or Powder Springs. I don't know. There's a ton of suburbs around there, but Atlanta area. Drunk. Out on parole due to COVID. Passed out drunk in a Wendy's drive-thru. In his car. in the driver's seat. Police were called. I think that's a solid call. You got someone passed out. They might need help. They might need medical help. I don't know. You didn't know. The cops didn't know. The person didn't know. Cops had nearly 20 minutes worth of interaction with this guy that went very well. Cops were nice and polite. Mr. Brooks was nice and polite. They did field sobriety testing, talked to him, found out who he was, where he was from, what he was up to, what he was doing that night. Being very courteous to the guy. I watched the body cam footage. Okay? So anyway, Mr. Brooks was then given a breathalyzer test. He was over the legal limit, intoxicated with alcohol. He was placed under arrest. He grappled with the cops, threw 2 cops off him like it was nothing. Stole a taser off one of the cops. Tased one cop. My understanding, could be wrong, is that the taser didn't hit center mass. It hit his arm and kind of ripped the skin right there, which meant he had 1 shot left. Pulled the taser around, squeezed the trigger, and that's when the cops fired real guns. Now, people have mentioned, why didn't they just call him an Uber, da-da-da-da-da-da-da. That's not on the cops to pay for his Uber, first off. And again, here's what I have to say. If you think that DUI is something that should not result in jail time, fines, suspension of license, you're allowed your opinion. Don't fight the cops, change the law. I'm going to disagree with you on that, but don't fight the cops, change the law. And there's a ton of other police interactions that I can point to where people jumped to defend someone that was acting in a improper manner with police officers. Don't fight the cops, change the law. Don't cuss out the cop, try to change the law. Don't try to shoot the cop, change the law. Don't try to... Everything has devolved to the dumbest common denominator. And the thing is, we can have these discussions. And I'm open to a lot of ideas. I think a lot of ideas are bad, but I'm open to trying some. So, anyway, I've gone on long enough, folks. I hope y'all are doing okay. Stay safe out there. Thanks for tuning in. Don't fight the cops. Change the law. Thanks for tuning in to another Cruise with Smooth. See ya.